In the sweltering humidity of Pak Chong, 1971, the cameras for The Big Boss stopped rolling. The silence that followed was not scripted. It was the sound of 300 people holding their breath as a local legend, a woman known in the underground circuits as the Queen of Death, lay motionless in the dirt. She was not bleeding. She was not unconscious. She was simply erased. She had arrived that morning with the explicit intent to dismantle Bruce Lee in front of his own crew. But 10 seconds later, she wasn't looking at a broken opponent. She was staring at the sky, wondering how a man could control the space around her without ever seeming to move. To understand the violence that occurred on that Tuesday afternoon, you must first understand the heat. Pak Chong in 1971 was not a film set, it was a crucible. The production of The Big Boss had moved into the rural interior of Thailand, a place where the jungle does not respect schedules or reputations. The air was heavy, a stagnant blanket of humidity that pressed against the skin from sunrise until long after the moon had risen. It was the kind of heat that makes men irritable, stripped of their social graces and prone to sudden, irrational outbursts. The crew was living in conditions that bordered on the primitive. No air conditioning, no fresh ice. The food was strange to the Hong Kong stomach, often resulting in illness that swept through the camp like a phantom. In this environment, patience was a finite resource, and it was running low. But the tension was not merely environmental, it was cultural. On one side, there was the Hong Kong crew, technicians and actors trying to manufacture a cinematic reality. In the center of them was Bruce Lee. At this moment in history, he was not yet the global icon of martial arts. He was simply an actor returning from America, carrying a chip on his shoulder and a philosophy that few understood. He was intense, often seen vibrating, with an excess of energy that looked, to the untrained eye, like anxiety. He moved differently. He spoke loud. He demanded perfection in a place that could barely offer competency. On the other side were the locals. The production had hired local Thai stuntmen to fill out the ranks of the factory workers and thugs in the film. These were not graduates of drama schools. They were men born in the boxing rings of Bangkok and the dust of the provinces. To them, fighting was not a choreography of wide angles and dramatic pauses. It was the visceral sound of shin bone colliding with rib cage. It was Muay Thai, the art of 8 limbs, and it was a religion of durability and pain. They watched Lee from the shadows of the equipment trucks. They saw a man who was small, wiry, and constantly stretching. They saw him practicing high, snapping kicks that looked beautiful but, to their minds, lacked the crushing weight of a Thai roundhouse. Witnesses from the crew later recalled the atmosphere in the mess tent. It was segregated by silence. The Thai stuntmen would eat their rice and watch Lee demonstrate his Jeet Kune Do concepts to the director. They didn't see a master. They saw a dancer. They saw a man who had Hollywood written on his movements, a man who, they believed, had forgotten what real violence felt like. This skepticism was not spoken aloud, not yet. It existed in the glances exchanged when Lee asked for a retake. It existed in the smirks that appeared when he wiped the sweat from his brow and complained about the mosquitoes. They mistook his refinement for fragility. The jungle creates a hierarchy. The strong survive, and the weak are consumed. As the days ground on, the heat seemed to strip away the professional veneer of the film set. The local fighters began to feel that the hierarchy was wrong. They were the lions of this territory, yet they were taking orders from a man they were becoming convinced was a paper tiger. The air in Pak Chong was filled with propane and dry grass. All it needed was a spark. That spark would not come from the men, however. It would come from a rumor drifting in from the village, a whisper about a woman who had heard there was a fighter in town and wanted to see if his blood ran as red as everyone else's. The furnace was lit. The metal was about to be tested. The disruption did not arrive with a shout. It arrived with a silence that cut through the noise of the film crew like a machete through high grass. It was mid-morning. The cameras were being repositioned for a wide shot of the ice factory exterior. The usual cacophony of Cantonese instructions and Thai chatter filled the air. Then, starting from the perimeter of the set, the noise began to die out. It wasn't a sudden hush. It was a wave of quiet that rolled inward toward the center where Bruce Lee stood reviewing his notes. A jeep had pulled up to the edge of the dirt road. It was an old, battered military surplus vehicle coated in red dust. From the passenger side stepped a woman. In the archives of martial arts history, her real name is often debated. Some records call her Nantana. Others simply refer to her by the moniker given to her by the gamblers in the underground rings of Nakhon Ratchasima, the Queen of Death. She was not a film star. She possessed none of the polished glamour that the Hong Kong crew was accustomed to. She was built like a weapon forged from scrap iron. She was not tall, but her posture was terrifyingly vertical. Her skin was dark, weathered by years of training outdoors, and her shins, visible beneath her shorts, were a roadmap of scar tissue. These were not the shins of a person who kicked heavy bags. These were shins that had been hardened against palm trees and the bones of other fighters. What struck the witnesses most was not her muscles, but her eyes. They were devoid of curiosity. They held the flat, predatory gaze of someone who had hurt people before and had ceased to feel anything about it. As she walked onto the set, the reaction of the local Thai stuntmen changed the atmosphere instantly. The smirks and the whispered jokes about Lee's dancing vanished. These men, who hours ago had been posturing like alphas, suddenly found something else to do. They looked at their feet. They adjusted equipment that didn't need adjusting. They knew who she was. One of the lighting technicians, a man named Somchai, later recounted the moment in a private interview. He said, "When she walked in, the air got colder. We knew she wasn't there for an autograph. She walked like she owned the ground under her feet. She did not approach the director. She did not ask for permission to be there. She walked past the craft services table, past the camera dolly, and stopped about 20 feet from where Bruce Lee was sitting. She didn't say a word. She simply crossed her arms and watched him. It was a violation of the unspoken rules of the set. You do not stare at the lead actor. You do not invade the working space. But no one moved to stop her. The security guards, local men themselves, remained frozen. They understood the hierarchy of violence better than the producers did. In their eyes, the man in the chair was an actor. The woman standing in the dirt was a killer. Lee continued to read his script, seemingly oblivious. But those who knew him best, his close inner circle, saw the change. His stillness became absolute. He hadn't looked up, but he knew she was there. He could feel the intent radiating off her like heat from a pavement. The predator had entered the camp, and for the first time since production began, the jungle was holding its breath. The paralysis on the set of The Big Boss could not last forever. Time in the movie business is money, and director Lo Wei was a man who cared deeply about both. Whatever silent communication was passing between the challenger and the star was broken by the shout of "Action!" The cameras rolled. The background actors began their pantomime of labor, but the scene was dead on arrival. The woman, the Queen of Death, did not respect the director's command. As the scene began, she simply walked forward, stepping directly into the frame. She didn't shout. She didn't throw a punch. She simply occupied the space where the action was supposed to be, forcing the camera operator to cut the feed. The director exploded, shouting in Cantonese, demanding the security remove the intruder. But the security, paralyzed by their local knowledge of who this woman was, did not move. They looked at the ground, feigning deafness. It was then that she spoke. Her voice was rasping, like tires on gravel. She spoke in Thai, her words directed not at the crew, but straight at the man in the center. A nervous production assistant, trembling, translated the message for the Hong Kong team. She says, "The camera makes you look fast," the translator stammered. "She wants to know if you are fast when the film is not in the camera. She says she has never seen a dancer who can fight." It was a classic bait. In the world of martial arts, challenging a man's authenticity is the ultimate insult. The Thai stuntmen leaned forward. This was the moment they expected the Hollywood actor to crumble, to hide behind his bodyguards, to threaten a lawsuit. Bruce Lee did none of those things. He slowly closed the script he was holding. He handed it to a nearby assistant with a gentleness that was almost unnerving. There was no flare of anger in his eyes. There was no puffing of the chest. Witnesses described a strange physical transformation. His shoulders dropped, his breathing deepened, and the frantic, high-strung energy that usually defined him on set evaporated. He became still. He stepped down from the raised platform of the factory set. He walked toward her, stopping 3 paces away, the critical distance where a kick can land without a step. He looked at her, then looked at the surrounding crew. He didn't speak a word of Thai, but the universal language of the challenge requires no translation. He extended an open hand, palm up, a gesture of invitation. "Come." The effect was magnetic. The 300 people on set, technicians, actors, villagers who had gathered at the fence, instinctively moved. They abandoned the lighting rigs and the catering tables. They formed a tight, suffocating circle around the 2 combatants. The dusty patch of ground between the ice factory and the jungle had become a coliseum. The air grew heavy, charged with the electricity of imminent violence. The Queen of Death smiled, a cold, humorless expression. She shifted her weight, the muscles in her legs coiling like springs. She raised her hands, not in a cinematic pose, but in the tight, high guard of a Muay Thai killer. The circle was drawn. The talking was over. The lesson was about to begin. In the history of combat, there is a distinct difference between a fight and an execution. A fight implies 2 parties with a chance of victory. What happened next was not a fight. The Queen of Death moved first. It was a move born of the jungle, a ferocious, whipping low kick aimed directly at Bruce Lee's lead knee. It was the kind of strike that snaps ligaments and ends careers. The Thai stuntmen knew the sound it would make. They flinched in anticipation of the crack, but the sound never came. Lee did not retreat. He did not block. He simply was not there. With a shift of weight so subtle it was almost invisible, he retracted his lead leg, letting her shin slice through empty air. The momentum of her own violence spun her slightly off balance. For a split second, she looked confused. In her world, people either blocked or they broke. They did not vanish. She reset. The frustration in her eyes replaced the coldness. She roared, a guttural sound of effort, and launched a flurry of strikes, a jab, a cross, and a high elbow intended to cut the brow. It was an assault that would have overwhelmed a standard martial artist. Bruce Lee stood in the eye of the hurricane. He moved with a terrifying economy. He parried the punches with open palms, his hands moving like water, redirecting her force rather than meeting it. He wasn't fighting her, he was steering her. Every time she struck, she found herself slightly more off-axis, slightly more vulnerable. Then came the interception. It is the core philosophy of Jeet Kune Do to stop the attack before it completes. As she chambered her leg for a massive rib-crushing roundhouse, Lee exploded. He did not wind up. He did not telegraph. From a standstill, his lead leg shot out like a piston. It was a side kick, delivered with the precision of a surgeon and the force of a battering ram. It caught her mid-air, right in the center of her chest, at the exact moment her gravity was compromised. The impact was sickeningly loud, a dull thud that echoed off the metal walls of the ice factory. She was lifted, literally lifted off her feet. The Queen of Death, the terror of the Pak Chong underground, was suspended in the air for a fraction of a second, her eyes wide with the shock of sudden weightlessness. Then gravity reclaimed her. She crashed into the red dirt 8 feet away from where she had started. Dust billowed up around her body. Lee did not pursue. He did not adopt a victory pose. He did not scream. He slowly lowered his leg and returned to his neutral stance, his hands dropping to his sides. He looked at her with an expression not of triumph, but of clinical observation. He was checking to see if the lesson had been received. The set was dead silent. The only sound was the wind rattling the palm leaves. The Thai stuntmen stared, their mouths slightly open. They had just watched their champion dismantled in less than 10 seconds, not by a brawl, but by a single, perfect movement. The dancer hadn't just beaten her. He had rendered her irrelevant. The most devastating injury in martial arts is rarely physical. Bones knit together. Bruises fade into memory. But when a fighter's understanding of their own reality is shattered, the wound never truly closes. For the woman lying in the dirt of Pak Chong, the pain in her chest was secondary. The true agony was the realization of what had just happened. She had entered this circle believing in the absolute power of aggression. She believed that violence was a contest of durability, that if she could hit hard enough, she would win. In 10 seconds, Bruce Lee had dismantled that belief. He hadn't overwhelmed her with strength. He hadn't outbrawled her. He had simply operated on a plane of existence she did not know existed. He had controlled the space, the time, and the outcome without breaking a sweat. Witnesses say she lay there for a long time. She wasn't unconscious. She was staring at the sky, her chest heaving as she fought to pull oxygen back into her lungs. When she finally sat up, the Queen of Death was gone. In her place was simply a woman covered in red dust, looking at a puzzle she could not solve. Lee did not stand over her. He did not offer a pithy one-liner for the cameras. He broke his stance and walked over to her. He didn't offer a hand to help her up. That would have been pity, and a warrior does not insult another with pity. Instead, he stood a few feet away and nodded. A small, almost imperceptible dip of the chin. It was an acknowledgment. You stepped up. You are still alive. Learn. She rose to her feet unsteadily. The Thai stuntmen, who had spent weeks sneering at the Hollywood actor, now watched with a reverence bordering on fear. They saw her look at him. The predatory glare was gone, replaced by a profound, shaken confusion. She brought her hands together in a Y, the traditional Thai gesture of respect, but her hands were trembling. She didn't say a word. She didn't look at the crew. She turned and walked back to her jeep, moving with the heavy, plodding steps of someone carrying a great burden. The engine started, and the vehicle disappeared back into the jungle from which it came. The silence she left behind was different now. It wasn't the silence of tension. It was the silence of a church. The hierarchy of the set had been violently rearranged. The stuntmen didn't look at Lee as an actor anymore. They went back to their work, but their movements were sharper, their voices lower. Bruce Lee sat back down in his canvas chair. He picked up his script. He looked at the director, who was still trembling with adrenaline, and said quietly, "We can shoot now." He had not just won a fight. He had broken the spirit of the opposition without firing a single shot in anger. The physical battle was over, but the psychological echo would ring through that camp until the production wrapped. The footage of that afternoon does not exist. Some say Director Lo Wei ordered the cameras to be jammed. Others claim the film was developed, watched once in a screening room in Hong Kong, and then burned. Too raw, too real for the fantasy they were trying to sell. The cinematic world wanted Bruce Lee, the superhero, not Bruce Lee, the technician who could dismantle a human being with the indifference of a machine. But celluloid is fragile. Memory is durable. Years later, long after The Big Boss had shattered box office records, and long after Bruce Lee had passed into the realm of myth, the story of Pak Chong began to surface. It didn't come from biographies or fan clubs. It came from the Thai stuntmen. These men, who went on to build the Thai action cinema industry, carried that Tuesday afternoon like a scar. In the training camps of Bangkok, when young fighters would boast about their speed or their toughness, the old veterans would quiet the room. They would tell the story of the dragon and the queen. They didn't talk about the kick. They talked about the stillness. They taught their students that true mastery was not about how loud you could scream, but how silent you could be before the strike. The Hollywood dancer had inadvertently planted the seeds of a new philosophy in the heart of the Muay Thai underground. And what of the queen? She never fought in the rings of Nakhon Ratchasima again. The gamblers waited for her return, but the jeep never came back. Rumors swirled that she had been crippled or that she had fled the country in shame. The truth was quieter. Decades later, a journalist tracking the production history of the film found an old woman living in a monastery near the Cambodian border. She walked with a slight limp, but her eyes were clear. She was tending a garden, pruning the branches of a Bodhi tree. When asked about the man in the white shirt, she didn't speak of defeat. She smiled, a genuine soft smile that the witnesses of 1971 would never have recognized. She said simply, "He showed me the end of my path. I was trying to break stone with my hands. He showed me that I could be the water." She had not been destroyed. She had been awakened. The violence that had defined her life had collided with a superior force and shattered, leaving her free. Bruce Lee left Thailand a few weeks later. He would go on to become the most famous martial artist in history. He would preach about being like water to millions of people on talk shows and in magazines. But in the red dust of Pak Chong, he hadn't preached. He had proved. The legend of that day is not about a winner and a loser. It is about the moment when the illusion of force met the reality of art. And in the silence of the jungle, if you listen closely, you can still hear the echo of that lesson. The day the Queen of Death learned that the ultimate weapon is not the fist. It is the mind that commands it.